In the late 17th century, an almost imperceptible but profoundly consequential revision took place within the heart of Christendom, when, in 1684, the Vatican discreetly excised 14 books, collectively known as the Apocrypha, from the canon of Scripture that millions had long regarded as immutable. These texts, which included such once venerated works as Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, Bel and the Dragon, and the Prayer of Manasseh, had been part of the English-language Bible since its first 1611 translation from the Latin Vulgate, yet they were removed without any formal announcement or theological justification. Overnight, passages that had informed devotional practice, moral instruction, and liturgical reading for decades simply vanished from official editions, leaving behind a gap that has never been satisfactorily explained by the Vatican. Some historians argue that the Apocrypha's elaborate narratives and theological nuances did not align with the ecclesiastical priorities of the Counter-Reformation Church, and so were quietly suppressed to streamline doctrine and reinforce clerical authority. Others maintain a darker motive, that these writings contained ideas about angelic hierarchies, penitential prayers, and alternative portrayals of Israel's history that might have encouraged interpretations of faith beyond the strict control of Rome, thus posing a threat to the uniformity of ecclesial power. Adding to the mystery, this period also saw the systematic alteration of the Messiah's name from an approximation of the original Hebrew Yahushua to the more Hellenized Jesus, effectively distancing Christian worship from its Semitic roots and further consolidating the Church's linguistic and cultural hegemony. The removal of these books and the renaming of the central figure of Christianity were never accompanied by official decrees or explanatory prefaces, and the silence that followed has only fueled speculation over the centuries. Apologists for the Church claim that the decision was a purely scholarly judgment about textual authenticity, while critics contend it was a calculated act of censorship designed to eliminate any scriptural passages that could encourage theological diversity or challenge the emerging orthodoxy. Today, the vanished apocryphal writings survive only in academic libraries and the memories of rare editions, their absence in modern Bibles a testament to the enduring tension between institutional authority and the multifaceted heritage of early Christian literature. Even now, more than 3 centuries later, scholars and believers alike continue to wonder what spiritual insights and historical perspectives were lost when the Vatican chose to draw its boundaries so quietly and so definitively around the sacred text. According to the contested but enduring testimony of Professor Genry Ludwig, a Russian scholar granted rare access to the Vatican's most closely guarded repositories, there lies beneath St. Peter's an immense labyrinth of concealed archives stretching over 85 kilometers of shelving and containing some 35,000 catalogued volumes. Ludwig asserted that among the mundane chronicles of papal elections, missionary expeditions, and European power struggles, he encountered startling documents suggesting that extraterrestrial intelligences had played a direct role in the development of the world's earliest great civilizations. He described passages referring to non-human architects of ancient Egypt's monumental pyramids, celestial benefactors guiding the astronomical knowledge of the Maya, and mysterious sky beings who endowed the Sumerians with writing and irrigation techniques. Perhaps most sensational of all were references to a weapon of astonishing destructive power, one said to have melted the ramparts of Babylon, whose described effects bear an uncanny resemblance to modern concepts of nuclear fission. Because Ludwig was forbidden to remove any physical evidence, His account rests entirely on his personal recollection, and critics dismiss it as an elaborate fabrication or misinterpretation of otherwise innocuous medieval manuscripts. Yet in June 2007, a separate incident seemed to lend unexpected credence to the notion that the Vatican occupies a unique intersection between earthly faith and otherworldly phenomena. During broad daylight over St. Peter's Square, multiple eyewitnesses photographed a perfectly disc-shaped object, silver-orange in hue, hovering silently above the basilica's famed dome. The craft emitted no engine noise, left no detectable wake, and vanished after only a few minutes, leaving behind only a handful of grainy images and a swirl of speculation. Skeptical commentators attributed the sighting to lens flares, misidentified weather balloons, or internet hoaxes, while more open-minded observers pointed out the symbolic resonance of a UFO appearing precisely over the spiritual heart of Catholicism. Taken together, Ludwig's underground revelations and the 2007 aerial apparition frame the Vatican, not merely as a repository of religious authority, but as a focal point for mysteries that bridge theology, history, and the possibility of intelligent life beyond Earth. Whether one views these accounts as thresholds to hidden truths or as seductive myths born of secrecy and speculation, they continue to provoke questions about what the Church knows and what it has chosen to keep buried beneath its sacred stones. Father Gabriel Amorth, who served as the Vatican's chief exorcist for a quarter-century and claimed responsibility for over 70,000 rites of deliverance, maintained that malevolent forces had penetrated even the sacred precincts of Vatican City on at least 2 harrowing occasions. The first incident he described took place in May 1981, when an assailant's attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II was, Amorth believed, more than a mere act of political violence. It was a direct strike by demonic entities aiming to derail the Church's divine mission. According to Amorth, the shooter's sudden fury and the inexplicable survival of the Pope, despite grievous wounds, bore the fingerprints of supernatural intervention on both sides. The darkness that sought to destroy and the unseen protection that preserved. The second breach occurred nearly 3 decades later, on Christmas Eve 2008, when a distressed woman named Susanna Miro rushed the altar during Pope Benedict XVI's midnight mass. Although secular observers largely attributed her actions to mental illness, Amorth was adamant that she had been manipulated by an unclean spirit. Her violent outburst, he insisted, a symptom of demonic control rather than mere psychological breakdown. He pointed out that she returned exactly 1 year later, again forcing her way toward the pontiff, and even knocking him to the floor before Swiss guards intervened. An escalation he saw as proof of a malign intelligence orchestrating events from behind the scenes. For Amorth, these episodes were not isolated curiosities, but evidence of an ongoing spiritual warfare waged at the very heart of Catholicism, a reminder that evil does not respect holy boundaries. He warned that the true enemy is invisible, cunning, enough to hide within the walls where humans least expect it, and powerful enough to turn moments of worship into battlegrounds for souls. Whether one accepts his interpretation or dismisses it as the imaginings of a zealous cleric, the testimony of Father Amorth endures as a chilling claim that even the Vatican, long regarded as the ultimate refuge of sanctity, has its gates tested by the forces of darkness. In 1917, 3 young shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal, reported a series of apparitions of the Virgin Mary, who entrusted them with 3 prophetic secrets. While the first 2 messages, visions of hell and a warning of a Second World War should humanity fail to repent, were eventually disclosed, the third secret remained locked away in Vatican vaults, its contents deemed too sensitive for the faithful. Lucia dos Santos, the last surviving seer, formally penned the third secret in 1943 and submitted it under strict instructions that it not be opened until 1960, the year she believed its meaning would become clear. Yet when that date arrived, the Vatican opted to continue its secrecy, offering no explanation for the delay and fueling speculation that the unrevealed text contained material too explosive to release. Critics argue that church authorities feared the third secret foretold not merely external persecution, but an internal cataclysm, a collapse of ecclesiastical structures or a crisis of faith so profound it might shatter the institution from within. In 2000, under Pope John Paul II, the Vatican finally published what it described as the full third secret, a vision of a bishop dressed in white, who is struck down by soldiers amid scenes of martyrdom and devastation. However, many theologians, historians, and lay Catholics remain unconvinced that this account matches Lucia's original manuscript. Discrepancies in tone, detail, and emphasis have led some to assert that the released text was a sanitized summary, crafted to avoid panic and preserve the Church's authority. Rumors persist that the true secret spoke of doctrinal heresies emerging at the highest levels, or of a spiritual crisis that would betray the Church's mission. To this day, the original 1943 document has not been made available for independent, scholarly review, and the question of what Mary really revealed to the children in Fatima continues to haunt believers and skeptics alike. The shroud of official silence has turned the third secret into a modern legend, a testament to the enduring tension between prophetic revelation and institutional control, and a reminder that some truths may lie forever beyond the reach of public scrutiny. A remarkable 6th century Syriac manuscript preserved in the British Library has quietly resurfaced in scholarly discussions, for within its fragile vellum leaves lies a narrative of Jesus far more human and profoundly more controversial than the one enshrined in Orthodox Christian teaching. According to this lost gospel, Jesus did not live out his adult years in celibate solitude. Rather, he formed a sacral partnership with Mary Magdalene, marrying her and fathering children, who carried forward his spiritual lineage. In this account, Mary Magdalene emerges not merely as a devoted follower or repentant sinner, but as the daughter of God and co-savior of humanity, sharing equally in the mission of redemption. Such intimate details stand in stark contrast to the canonical Gospel's portrait of Jesus as wholly other, divine, sinless, and unattached to earthly bonds. Proponents of the manuscript contend that its omission from the New Testament canon was no accident but a deliberate act of suppression by early church authorities determined to solidify a theology that exalted Christ's transcendence over his humanity. By excising any suggestion of marital or familial ties, they argue, the emerging orthodoxy preserved a model of spiritual purity that discouraged challenges to clerical celibacy and reinforced the singular authority of a male-dominated hierarchy. Yet the manuscript's authenticity remains fiercely contested. Some scholars dismiss it as a later apocryphal creation, perhaps the work of a Gnostic sect whose teachings were deemed heretical and thus erased from official histories. Radiocarbon tests and linguistic analyses yield conflicting results, leaving open the possibility that the text is either a genuine window into a suppressed tradition or an elaborate forgery designed to provoke theological debate. Critics point out inconsistencies in script style and doctrinal content that seem anachronistic for a 6th century origin, while supporters highlight the manuscript's alignment with earlier non-canonical writings that likewise elevated Mary Magdalene's role. Regardless of its provenance, the Lost Gospel forces modern readers to confront uncomfortable questions about how the early Church decided which voices to preserve and which to silence. If Jesus did indeed embrace marriage and parenthood, the implications would ripple through centuries of doctrine, calling into question fundamental assumptions about the nature of holiness, the role of women in the Church, and the boundary between the divine and the human. In the end, the manuscript stands as both a tantalizing possibility and a challenge. Either it reveals a hidden chapter of Christian origins, or it underscores how power and politics can shape, and sometimes rewrite, the stories we choose to believe. In the shadowy annals of 9th century Christendom, few episodes rival the macabre spectacle known as the Cadaver Synod, in which the deceased Pope Formosus was exhumed, put on trial, and posthumously punished by his successor, Pope Stephen VI. Following Formosus's death in 896, political factions within the Vatican, still reeling from disputes over papal legitimacy and the influence of powerful Roman nobles, sought to retroactively invalidate his pontificate. In January 897, Stephen ordered that Formosus's rotting corpse be disinterred, clothed once more in papal vestments, and seated upon a throne in the Basilica of St. John Lateran to face charges of perjury and violating canon law. A deacon was appointed to answer on behalf of the corpse as prosecutors leveled their accusations. When the corpse pleaded guilty, the so-called synod declared all of Formosus's acts null and void. Ordinations he had performed were annulled, and 3 fingers from his right hand, the digits used to bless the faithful, were brutally amputated. Finally, his desecrated body was dragged through Rome's streets and cast into the Tiber River, a symbolic gesture meant to consign his memory to oblivion. Yet the violence did not end with Formosus's corpse. Public outrage over this grotesque display grew so intense that within months Pope Stephen himself was deposed, imprisoned, and strangled. His immediate successors, first Romanus and then Theodore II, each held the papacy only briefly before dying under mysterious circumstances. The Cadaver Synod thus stands as more than a bizarre footnote. It reveals a period when the papal office was entangled in ruthless power struggles and when the boundaries between sacred ritual and political theater dissolved into atrocity. By literally putting a dead man on trial, the Vatican hierarchy of the time demonstrated how far ambition and factionalism could override notions of sanctity and respect for the dead. Later medieval historians would condemn the Cadaver Synod as an aberration, and subsequent popes took care to distance the Church from its legacy of internal violence. Nevertheless, the episode remains a chilling testament to an era when the pursuit of authority could desecrate even the most hallowed offices, and when the line between justice and vengeance was submerged beneath the bloodied waters of the Tiber. Despite its moral teachings that often warn against the seductions of wealth and worldly pleasures, the Vatican has quietly embraced high-stakes financial ventures that expose a striking tension between its spiritual doctrines and profit motives. In recent years, investigators discovered that the Vatican's powerful Secretariat of State channeled millions of euros into the Centurion Global Fund, a private equity vehicle whose diversified portfolio included investments in major Hollywood productions, most notably the biographical musical Rocket Man, which chronicles Elton John's journey through fame and his same-sex relationship. While the fund's managers insisted that the Vatican took no part in creative decisions, the size and sophistication of the investment imply that senior church officials were well aware of where their money was going. To some observers, this represented a pragmatic strategy. By placing capital in profitable ventures, the church could generate revenue to support charitable works, maintain historic properties, and fund its global missions without relying solely on donations. Yet critics saw a glaring contradiction. The same institution that upholds traditional teachings on sexuality and morality was indirectly profiting from a film whose very subject matter stands at odds with those teachings. The controversy intensified when financial statements revealed that the Centurion Global Fund's holdings extended beyond entertainment into industries, such as for-profit healthcare, real estate speculation, and even arms manufacturing, that further challenged the Church's proclamations on human dignity, social justice, and peace. Though Vatican spokesmen defended these allocations as part of a diversified approach to safeguarding the Church's patrimony, the lack of transparency fueled suspicions that profit, rather than principle, had become the driving force. For an institution that claims a divine mandate to serve the poor and marginalized, the optics of collecting dividends from blockbuster films and controversial enterprises struck many as hypocritical. This episode underscores a broader dilemma facing the modern church: how to steward immense financial resources in a way that remains faithful to its ethical commitments. In an era when religious authority is increasingly judged by public accountability and moral consistency, the Vatican's foray into high-risk investments raises urgent questions. Can an organization preach detachment from material gain while operating within the same markets that prize it above all else? Or does the imperative to preserve centuries-old institutions and fund global ministries justify engaging with economic realities that seem to contradict its own teachings? As the Church continues to navigate these complex waters, the tension between doctrine and dollar signs remains an unresolved and deeply revealing chapter in its long history. Vatican City, despite its reputation as the epicenter of global Catholicism and a symbol of spiritual reverence, paradoxically records the highest per capita crime rate in the world, a statistic that owes far less to organized wrongdoing than to opportunistic petty theft targeting its throngs of visitors. With over 5 million pilgrims and tourists streaming through its gates each year, some estimates even approach 7 million, the tiny enclave of barely 800 residents becomes a treasure trove for pickpockets and purse snatchers who exploit. The confusion and crowding around iconic landmarks like St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican museums, and the Sistine Chapel. These skilled opportunists blend seamlessly into the flow of sightseers, using every imaginable distraction, from guided tour commentary to selfie sticks, to lift wallets, passports, and smartphones without ever drawing attention. In practice, the city's crime figures soar not because of violent crime or large-scale fraud, but because a handful of minor incidents, often involving tourists too distracted by Michelangelo's frescoes or the grandeur of St. Peter's Square, are amplified against the nation's microscopic population. Thus, a dozen daily pickpocketing reports can translate into an astronomical crime per capita ratio that dwarfs virtually every other jurisdiction on Earth. Yet beyond the cold arithmetic of statistics, this phenomenon underscores a deeper irony. Within a domain consecrated to moral authority and centuries of religious tradition, the human impulse toward transgression continues to flourish. reminding even the most devout observer that sanctified walls cannot wholly deter the world's age-old temptations. Security measures have steadily increased in response. Uniformed Swiss guards patrol alongside plainclothes police. X-ray scanners guard every museum entrance, and visitor education campaigns warn devotees to secure their valuables. But the unrelenting tide of pilgrims ensures that petty crime remains a stubborn fixture. As the Vatican balances its sacred mission with the pragmatic demands of modern tourism management, it must confront the incongruous reality that holiness and human frailty coexist inextricably. While worshippers kneel in prayer and marvel at Renaissance art just beyond the nave's hush, a cunning pickpocket may be planning his next move. A reminder that no sanctuary, however hallowed, is ever entirely immune to the world's less virtuous inclinations. Beneath the hushed marble, halls and sunlit courtyards of the Vatican lies a tapestry of enigmas that has beguiled scholars, pilgrims, and conspiracy theorists for centuries. Whispers of ancient prophecies, purportedly penned by sages long before Constantine set foot in Rome, speak of celestial alignments and apocalyptic reckonings. Yet the source and authenticity of these divine forecasts have never been fully authenticated. Rumors of hidden vaults, secret chambers carved into the very bedrock beneath St. Peter's Basilica, persist, with tales of crypts brimming with arcane manuscripts, relics of lost Gnostic Gospels, and scrolls erased of their most incendiary passages. Even the skies above the Holy See have not been spared from mystery. Accounts of unexplained aerial phenomena, vivid orbs of light darting among Michelangelo's domes, have prompted some to wonder whether extraterrestrial visitors have silently observed the seat of Christendom. All the while, the Vatican's famed secret archives remain locked away from public scrutiny, their contents shrouded in ecclesiastical decree and legend. Among the Church's most tantalizing secrets is the full third secret of Fatima, which Sister Lucia de Jesus disclosed in 1944, but which the Vatican officially released only in 2000. And even then, many believe the published version represents only a fragment of what was originally entrusted to the Church. Scholars note discrepancies between Sister Lucia's handwritten notes and the archived files, fueling speculation that additional verses, perhaps describing a second coming, a catastrophic judgment, or hidden truths about the papacy itself, were deliberately withheld. These layers of secrecy, stitched together by erased texts, selective disclosure, and the occasional leak, have fostered a fertile ground for imagination. Clandestine sects supposedly seek to access the missing pages, while amateur sleuths scour microfilm rolls in search of anomalous gaps. Vatican officials insist that the archive's restrictions are a matter of preservation, not concealment, and that any future openings will be governed by scholarly rigor rather than sensationalism. Yet the very act of forbidding access only intensifies curiosity, ensuring that talk of cryptic codices and prophetic revelations remains a potent undercurrent in discussions of church history. In this interplay between guarded secrecy and insatiable inquiry, the Vatican stands as both keeper and provocateur, its silent doors and sealed safes a perpetual invitation to ponder what truths may lie buried within, and to imagine how those truths, once unearthed, might reshape our understanding of faith, history, and the divine.